When meticulous historians stack up Spain's very worst monarchs, a single notorious name towers unchallenged at the summit of infamy. Every academic scholar who carefully inspects his troubled reign reaches the identical, chilling verdict. No ruler to sit upon the Spanish throne has ever been more corrupt, more vicious, more shamelessly deviant in his appetites. And you still haven't heard the entire unfiltered tale. The stories taught about strategic weddings, noble blood, and the refined dignity of European royalty are nothing but an ornate velvet curtain hiding a monstrous backstage reality. Ferdinand VII did far more than merely govern Spain. He converted the royal palace into a twisting labyrinth of sexual dread that could redden the cheeks of a seasoned portside madam. Long before the realm spat out the nickname El Rey Felon, the infamous criminal king, he was a prince so misshapen, so helpless in the bedroom, that his own mother-in-law penned letters aghast, saying he scarcely qualified as a man. This remains one of the few verified episodes in European history where numerous eyewitness testimonies, royal doctors, foreign envoys, and the victims themselves all report the identical, chilling anatomical fact that redirected an entire nation's fate. What you're about to learn will utterly shatter your picture of royal authority. It is at once the most pitiful and the most horrifying account of intimate malfunction ever archived in the chronicles of monarchy. Now allow me to return you to a wedding night in 1819, so notorious that even the Pope was finally forced to step in. October 1819, inside the lantern-lit corridors of Madrid's royal palace. A trembling 16-year-old princess stands frozen in her bridal chamber. Maria Josepha Amalia of Saxony, reared within a convent, and so naive she believed infants were delivered by gentle storks, waits anxiously for her new, unseen husband. Not a single elder has explained what a wedding night truly involves. Her German ladies-in-waiting, mortified to teach such matters, simply laced her into snowy silk and departed, leaving her gripping a wooden rosary. At last the heavy door creaks open. What strides in is no storybook prince. Instead comes a 35-year-old monarch, heavy-set, gout-ridden, with swollen, protruding lips and the hungry stare of a prowling predator. Yet those coarse features are not what freezes the young queen's blood. Ferdinand VII carried a medical affliction so rare, so grotesque, that even modern specialists continue to debate it. Termed macrogenitosomia, in plain speech his organs were monstrously enlarged, although not in any flattering sense. French author Prosper Mérimée, after interviewing courtiers present that unforgettable night, painted the horror in meticulous detail, narrow like sealing wax at the root, ballooning to fist thick at the tip, stretching almost the full length of a polished billiard cue. Now envision a cloistered 16-year-old girl, raised by strict nuns, suddenly confronted with that nightmare. The startled young queen glanced just once and darted off the mattress, shrieking in raw, animal panic. Yet the nightmare immediately deepened. Ferdinand, flushed with tavern wine and reckless craving, lurched after her. Visualize an extremely overweight 35-year-old monarch wobbling through a gilded chamber, trying to seize a terrified teenager, sprinting desperately for her life. The girl moved like a startled fawn, the sovereign lumbered like a wounded boar. Stung by this humiliating rejection, Ferdinand devised the sort of remedy only a warped monarch could imagine. He thundered from the room entirely naked, his abnormality on full display, and bellowed down the marble corridor at the Queen's attendants. He ordered them, voices echoing off silk-lined walls, to render the bride submissive within a quarter of an hour. The bewildered ladies, among them the Queen's own sister-in-law, somehow had to explain to a petrified child precisely what was about to unfold. Whatever cautious words they chose merely magnified the horror. When Ferdinand returned, determined to assert his marital rights, he was greeted by a sour stench no avalanche of palace perfume could conceal. In her utter fright, the young queen had lost every shred of bodily control. Spain's king, resplendent in grotesque nudity, discovered his nuptial bed smeared with human waste. He recoiled, snarling that queens should smell of civet, not cesspit, then stormed away, vowing not to touch his bride for more than a week. Tragically, that ghastly tableau proved only the prologue to Maria Josefa's ordeal. To grasp how a wedding night could derail so catastrophically, we must examine what Ferdinand VII concealed beneath those regal garments. Brace yourself, the details turn medically disturbing. Multiple court physicians who inspected the king left exhaustive, alarmed notes. Dr. José María de la Fuente recorded that His Majesty possessed an organ of such staggering scale that normal conjugal relations were impossible without serious injury to any partner. Size, however, was only half the horror. The grotesque shape, thin at its root and swelling to a fist-thick tip, resembled an iron device from a medieval dungeon. Far from a masculine badge of pride, the disfigurement had tormented Ferdinand since his very first marriage at 17. Wondering just how disastrous things could be, consider that inaugural union. In 1792, not 1702, the youthful prince wed his cousin Maria Antonia of Naples inside a candle-lit chapel. According to her own letters, the groom merely stared, clumsily pawed her, and repeatedly squeezed her breasts, completely unsure how to proceed. The future king genuinely did not comprehend the mechanics of sex. For 11 consecutive months, 11 grinding, humiliating months, the marriage remained unconsummated. The prince would become visibly excited, attempt penetration, then collapse in frustrated defeat. His freakish anatomy transformed the simplest human act of reproduction into an unsolvable riddle. Maria Antonia's mother, Queen Maria Carolina, penned ever more desperate notes across Europe. "My daughter sobs every night. The prince feels nothing. Every inducement is futile. There is neither pleasure nor effect. This sad condition is devastating for anyone chained to his side." Word of the dysfunction circulated through embassies like wildfire. Ultimately, the royal confessor intervened. A Catholic priest, cheeks reddening, was obliged to instruct the future ruler of Spain, in the bluntest, most explicit terms imaginable, how to couple with his own spouse. The resulting scandal rippled across salons and chancelleries, igniting gossip in every court from Vienna to London and branding Ferdinand's name with everlasting ridicule. Spain's crown prince was sexually inept, a medical oddity, unable to carry out the most fundamental wedded obligation. When he finally succeeded after close to a year of humiliating failures, the aftermath proved disastrously brutal. Maria Antonia endured 2 traumatic miscarriages, probably triggered by internal trauma, and perished at barely 21. Her fragile body lay shattered by her husband's deformity, bruised in mind, spirit, and flesh. Now, for the truly grotesque twist. Once Ferdinand at last learned the mechanics of sex, he became utterly consumed by it. The passing of his first spouse in 1806 released him from the marital yoke, yet it also unchained something hideous lurking within. The prince who couldn't perform mutated into a monarch who couldn't quit. By the time Ferdinand reclaimed power in 1814, following Napoleon's collapse, he was 30, pent up, resentful, and intoxicated by unchecked authority. What came next was a decade of indulgence, cruelty, and excess that would cause Caligula himself to redden. Night after night, the king slipped out of the palace beneath a shadowy cloak, boots muffled on the marble stairs. His destination, the seediest, smokiest bordello in Madrid. His preferred den was run by a fearsome madam nicknamed Pepa la Malaga, a house so infamous that respectable folks crossed the roadway to bypass it entirely. Ferdinand never ventured alone. He recruited a pack of young nobles, rogues as bankrupt in conscience and character as he was, and together they converted Madrid's red light quarter into their private amusement park. Here is where the story turns downright perverse. Proud of the deformity that once shamed him, Ferdinand wielded it as a travelling parlour stunt. Numerous witnesses, nobles and prostitutes alike, repeat the same stomach-churning tableau. The ruler of Spain, soused on cheap tavern wine, would dare his comrades to length contests. Each man bared himself, literally lining up to compare girths and boasts. Ferdinand always prevailed. His cronies even coined him a pet name, El Bien Dotado, the well-endowed. The king strutted around those brothels, his hideous anatomy flaunted under lamplight, boasting of fresh nightly conquests. Yet the crowing was the least unsettling element. Ferdinand had cultivated a singular, sinister kink, exposing the abyss of his depravity. In testimony recorded by Count José María de Villalobos, the king bragged, "Women depart my bed, certain no other male can equal my delight. Do you know what delights me most afterward? Gathering the linens blotched with proof of their maidenhood." Think about that for a moment. The sovereign of Spain hoarded bloodied sheets from virgins he deflowered. He stored them as macabre mementos. This was no medieval custom wreathed in symbolism. It was a personal fixation, a gruesome pastime pursued with the obsessive zeal other rulers reserved for artwork and jewels. While the Prado Museum was rising, ironically, at the initiative of his overlooked second queen, Ferdinand was curating a secret gallery of crimson-stained relics. The prostitutes at Pepa Malaga's were hardly his only prey. Traversing the kingdom, Ferdinand scattered a wake of ruined lives, a sorrowful widow in Aranjuez, a farm girl in Sacedon, frightened maids inside the palace who dared not refuse their sovereign. Each encounter swelled his private archive, each scarlet rag another token in his chamber of horrors. Meanwhile, Spain was visibly crumbling. While Ferdinand squandered dusk till dawn measuring genitals and harvesting virginal blood, the nation forfeited its entire American empire. Liberal reformers were executed by the thousands. The economy imploded, trade routes withered, hunger stalked the countryside. Yet the monarch remained ice-cold and indifferent. He had dens to haunt, women to destroy, trophies to amass, and a monstrous ego to feed. This was the same predatory monarch who would ultimately collect 3 additional brides. 3 further young women destined to learn that marrying the King of Spain meant stepping across a threshold into nightmares no Gothic novelist could concoct. In 1816, the 31-year-old Ferdinand found himself desperate for a male successor. His solution, repugnant yet convenient, wed his own niece. Maria Isabel of Braganza, barely 19, plain-featured and worst of all Portuguese, 3 unforgivable traits in Madrid's venom-tongued court, became the sacrificial choice. Street gossips mocked her arrival with a barbed refrain, "Fea, pobre, portuguesa, chúpate esa." Ugly, penniless, Portuguese, choke on that. Yet the timid princess carried what her husband conspicuously lacked: dignity, intellect, and heart. While Ferdinand prowled brothels after dusk, she quietly laid the cornerstone of the Prado Museum, opened the Royal Academy's doors to women painters, and tried, candle by candle, to civilize a palace steeped in vice. The king scarcely noticed. In his eyes, she was nothing more than a functioning womb, a breathing vessel for the heir he longed to flaunt before Europe. At last, in 1818, her pregnancy was confirmed, and Ferdinand's legend veered from lurid comedy into pure horror. When Maria Isabel went into labor, disaster struck at once. The infant lay breech, the Queen's pulse weakened, and court physicians faced a brutal dilemma: preserve the mother or rescue the child. Ferdinand's command snapped like a whip: save the child. Cut her, if you must. 12 eyewitnesses later penned identical reports. Surgeons began an emergency caesarean. Remember, this was 1818, when anesthesia was brandy, laudanum, and whispered prayers. They opened the Queen's abdomen, believing her senseless. She was not. Midway through the ordeal, her eyes flew open and a scream ricocheted through alabaster halls. Awake and aware, she felt every savage incision as trembling hands searched for life. The infant was already a corpse, dead for hours. Maria Isabel bled out on the table, dying at 21 in unspeakable torment, sacrificed for an heir who never breathed. Her outraged sister denounced Ferdinand in public squares. Velvet corridors buzzed with suspicions. Perhaps the king's grotesque anatomy damaged the pregnancy. Perhaps the rampant syphilis he'd collected on nightly forays poisoned the womb. Ferdinand, armored in selfishness, felt no shame. Within a year, he hunted bride number 3. Duty, he insisted, required it. If Maria Isabel's fate was tragic, what awaited his next consort was so obscene that even the Vatican recoiled. Remember Maria Josepha, the 16-year-old who lost control on her wedding night? That humiliation was merely Act 1 in her marital horror. After the disastrous encounter, Ferdinand shunned the terrified teenager for 7 days. When he finally slipped back beneath her canopy, the young queen fought him off with astonishing ferocity, beginning a nightly struggle that would darken every remaining moment of her brief, brutal reign. The young bride, schooled by cloistered nuns to be docile and courteous, exploded into a clawing tigress the instant her husband pressed his advances. She bit, she scratched, she drove her knee into his grotesque groin with such force that the monarch staggered away, yowling like a wounded hound. Still, defiance could not endure indefinitely. Ferdinand remained the sovereign. Maria Josepha remained his chattel. So he chose a revised tactic: relentless patience. Night after night he slipped into her chamber. Night after night she clutched a rosary and murmured Ave Marias while he tried to coax submission. Ironically, the Queen's greatest shield was ignorance itself. Reared on convent tales, she honestly believed infants arrived by stork. When Ferdinand attempted a candid lesson in biology, she accused him of blasphemy, insisting he sought to lure her into mortal sin. God would never design so base a path for creating life, she protested. You mock my virtue with wicked inventions. Weeks bled into months. The same prince who bragged in taverns about endless conquests could not claim his own wife. Courtiers whispered behind tapped fans. Foreign envoys dispatched incredulous dispatches to their capitals. The King of Spain was being spurned by a teenager. At last, Ferdinand played his final card. He wrote to Rome. Pope Pius VII, the weathered pontiff who had outlived Napoleon and believed he had witnessed every scandal imaginable, opened a letter that could have shaken even a saint. The Catholic monarch of Spain needed the vicar of Christ to persuade his queen to share his bed. The pontifical reply, preserved in Vatican vaults, remains a minor masterpiece of velvet-gloved pressure. His Holiness gently reminded the couple that marital union was not merely allowed but divinely mandated. Producing heirs, he stressed, was Maria Josepha's sacred obligation. Denying her spouse meant denying Providence itself. Yet even the papal seal failed to break her resolve. The Queen negotiated terms with the precision of a canon lawyer. She would submit only if 3 conditions were met. She must recite an entire rosary beforehand. Her eyes must stay shut throughout the act. Her thoughts must rest upon the Virgin, so her soul remained stainless. Picture Ferdinand, absolute ruler over armies and colonies, lying powerless while his adolescent consort whispers, "Ave Maria, gratia plena," as he fumbles for legitimacy. Historians agree it became the least erotic marriage in royal chronicles. Maria Josefa lay motionless, lips fluttering in prayer, as the king, who once hoarded blood-stained linens like hunting trophies, begged for a flicker of enthusiasm. 10 interminable years crawled by in this purgatorial routine. 10 years of candlelit encounters scored by bead-clicking devotions. 10 years without a single cry of an infant echoing through the palace corridors. When the Queen died in 1829, officially of fever, and barely 25, the Alcazar exhaled collective relief. Courtiers whispered that death had granted the girl the mercy marriage never did. Ferdinand grieved less for a wife than for an heir that never came. Behind shuttered windows, attendants packed away untouched cradle linens, while priests offered requiem masses. And Spain's sovereign, who could command executions with a quill stroke, stood once more alone, still emperor of all he surveyed, yet forever defeated by a string of wooden prayer beads. Ferdinand had come up short yet again. 3 marriages, 2 widowed brides, and still 0 lawful heirs. At 45, his body wrecked by decades of riotous indulgence, the king faced a last desperate chance. This round he selected a consort who equalled him in calculation, if not in depravity. Maria Cristina of Bourbon II, Sicilies knew precisely what awaited her. In stark contrast to Ferdinand's earlier spouses, she arrived fully prepared. Only 23, she was striking, quick-witted, and unsentimentally pragmatic. She also happened to be the king's own niece, because incest, apparently, was the sole Bourbon custom he still honoured. Yet Maria Cristina had pored over her predecessor's disasters. She grasped that producing an heir was less a political formality and more a mechanical riddle. The breakthrough emerged from an unexpected ally, the royal physician, Dr. Antonio Hernandez. After studying the monarch's anatomy and consulting the grim files from earlier unions, the doctor arrived at a startling verdict. The issue was not simply Ferdinand's extraordinary size, it was the physics of engagement. Imagine trying to plant a seed when your spade is absurdly larger than the flower bed. You must adjust either the implement or the soil. Since reshaping the king was unthinkable, creativity became the mandate. Dr. Hernandez's fix was as elegant as it was simple. He ordered court craftsmen to fabricate a specialized cushion, una almohadilla, stitched from lustrous silk and filled with downy feathers. But this was no ordinary pillow. A precisely cut aperture, 4 centimeters deep, lay at its heart. The idea was straightforward. Ferdinand would pass himself through the opening, which would function as a buffer, shielding his partner from the internal injuries that had doomed earlier attempts at conception. Only the necessary tip could reach its target. Maria Cristina presented the proposal with the tact of a seasoned diplomat. She cast it not as an admission of deformity, but as a medically sanctioned pathway to strong royal offspring. The king's ego, forever his Achilles' heel, swallowed the explanation whole and nodded assent. And so the experiment began. Their inaugural evening with the contraption proved undeniably clumsy. Ferdinand, accustomed to bragging about his formidable dimensions, now faced the sting of a constraint. Maria Cristina, ever pragmatic, treated it like any ceremonial protocol, a practical measure for the welfare of the dynasty. Yet the scheme succeeded. Inside 3 months, the young queen was with child. Every face at court froze in anxious anticipation. Would this gestation end, like countless earlier ones, in hemorrhage and despair? On 10 October 1830, Madrid's artillery thundered in jubilation. Queen Maria Cristina had delivered a robust daughter, the future Isabella II. 2 years later, she bore another girl, Louisa Fernanda. At last, Ferdinand possessed legitimate offspring. The achievement required 4 brides, 2 fatalities, a papal mediation, 1 tailor-made copulatory cushion, and countless whispered prayers. Courtiers who had mocked his impotence hurried to compose flattering verses for the official gazette, while priests proclaimed the birth proof that Providence still favoured the Bourbon line. Isabella's arrival, however, forged a fresh dilemma. Castilian statute, the imported Salic Code, barred women from the crown. The king's brother, Don Carlos, fully expected to succeed, but Ferdinand, having virtually engineered these babies, refused to let a legal footnote thwart him. In a decree that would hurl Spain into bitter civil strife, he issued the Pragmatic Sanction of 1830, erasing centuries of precedent so his daughter could ascend. When he died in 1833, his bodily curse produced one last ripple, the First Carlist War, a savage struggle that claimed hundreds of thousands, all because a deformed monarch finally mastered a cushion. Let us circle back to the trophies Ferdinand once boasted about, his stash of blood-spattered linens, for here his depravity reached its murkiest abyss. Following the monarch's death in 1833, Maria Cristina discreetly ordered an inventory of his private apartments. The findings beggared belief. Inside a cedar coffer draped in silk lay dozens of cloth squares, each meticulously tagged with date and name. Carmen, paper seller's house, March 1821. Isabella, palace maid, January 1823. Maria, widow of Vaines, September 1824. The king had not exaggerated. He had curated these grisly mementos for almost 2 decades. Every scrap symbolized a woman, some willing, many coerced, who had endured Ferdinand's peculiar savagery. Yet the archive revealed a secondary pattern long whispered about in corridors. The dates clustered around historical shocks. After each political fiasco, after every liberal rising he crushed, after every execution warrant he signed, Ferdinand added several trophies in rapid bursts. Violence in council chambers echoed as violence in bedrooms. The man who condemned citizens by daylight harvested virgin blood after dusk. It seemed the annihilation of civic liberty and the violation of female purity were 2 sides of a single diseased coin. One notation chilled inspectors. Anna, 15, daughter of Colonel Bermudez, February 1823. Colonel Bermudez had been among the liberal officers shot following the abortive constitutional revolt. His girl Anna had entered the palace to plead for her father's life. She departed with her father executed and her innocence destroyed, forever archived in Ferdinand's monstrous collection. This was no mere monarch misusing authority for carnal thrills. It amounted to organized predation. Sex became yet another instrument of political intimidation. Liberals whom Ferdinand could not lawfully shoot, he destroyed instead through their daughters, their spouses, their sisters. The detailed inventory never reached the public eye. Maria Cristina, displaying sharper judgment than her late spouse ever mustered, ordered the cash incinerated, though several courtiers inspected it first and documented every horror. Their testimonies align precisely, too precisely, to dismiss as corridor rumor. We know Ferdinand preserved these grisly keepsakes. We know he tagged each one. We know he expanded the stash after bursts of state violence. What remains unknown is how many women endured agony to stock this macabre gallery. The few surviving rags imply dozens. Reality was almost certainly bleaker. Generations of outraged historians would, decades later, sift through the scattered ashes, piecing together the awful, lingering calculus of lust, terror, power, and fear. Because predators share one trait, they never broadcast their defeats. For every blood-smeared memento locked inside that chest, how many women drove him away? How many slipped free? How many were muted before telling the tale? We shall never learn. Ferdinand carried those secrets into the tomb alongside the names of victims whose only misfortune was attracting a ruler who equated authority with consent. When Ferdinand VII died on 29 September 1833, Spain scarcely wept. His own brother instantly raised the banner of war. His daughter soon fought repeated civil conflicts to defend the throne he had rigged for her. His widow promptly wed a palace guardsman, shocking the realm one last time. Yet Ferdinand's lasting imprint was not strategic. It was intimate. He had warped the Spanish monarchy from revered institution to sordid punchline. Every subsequent sovereign carried the stain. Every dynastic marriage met with distrust. His daughter, Isabella II, inherited more than a crown. She also inherited his voracious tastes. Her own notorious liaisons and rumoured nymphomania toppled her in 1868. The Bourbon house that Ferdinand had quite literally sired into being fell because of the same inherited vice. Pause and picture that cushion. A king so malformed that ordinary conception required mechanical assistance. A dynasty so desperate for progeny it converted the nuptial bed into a clinical apparatus. That pillow, now vanished, symbolizes every rot within Ferdinand's rule. Power twisted until it deformed flesh. Legitimacy so delicate it dangled by a slit exactly measured within a silk pad. Perhaps the harshest twist of fate is this: Ferdinand is recalled not for daring reforms nor for admirable acts, but for the grotesque body that scarred everyone around him. He longed to be El Deseado, the cherished sovereign. Instead, he became a living warning that unchecked power breeds nightmares. Every scholar who scrutinizes his reign delivers the same verdict. Biographer Stanley Gaio called him craven, selfish, grasping, distrustful, revengeful. Historian Alois Laha named him the sorriest specimen among both Habsburgs and Bourbons. His contemporary, the Duke of Wellington, dismissed him as the most contemptible creature under heaven. Those judgments are accurate, yet still too gentle, because Ferdinand was far worse than an inept monarch. He was a predator wearing a diadem, a man who forged his freakish physique into a weapon, a ruler who stockpiled human misery the way collectors hoard paintings. That, ultimately, is the shadow he cast. Not the throne bequeathed to his daughter, nor the civil wars he ignited, nor even the bizarre cushion that finally bought him an heir. His true memorial lies in the nameless women from that burned chest of linens, the maids who could not refuse, the virgins turned trophies, the wives who died or lived in terror. Ferdinand VII proved monsters need not lurk under beds or in dark forests. Sometimes they sit on thrones draped in ermine, toasted as saviors, and sometimes, just sometimes, history records them with chilling precision. If this tale unsettled you, consider exploring the saga of the medieval Untold stories, so don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next video.